session. So this is the mid-year review of the 2018 estimates for public services, vote 29, Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment. We're engaging this afternoon Minister Denis Naughton, TD, Minister for Communications, Climate Action and Environment, and Minister Sean Kine, Minister of State for Natural Resources and Digital Development at the Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment. So members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I also wish to advise that all submissions, opening statements that have been made to the committee will be published on the committee webpage after this meeting. So I'd like to welcome both ministers to our meeting this afternoon, and I might start with Minister Denis Naughton to make your opening statement.
Chair, thank you very much, and thank the committee for having me here this afternoon. I welcome the opportunity to meet with the committee today to consider the mid-term expenditure position and performance across the 6 vote programmes within my department. I'll keep my opening statement brief to allow the committee sufficient time to examine the programme expenditure to the outturn at the end of June. I'm joined by Minister of State Sean Kine, who has responsibility for community affairs, natural resources and digital development. I'm also joined by my officials, Finola Rossi, the Finance Officer, Jim Whelan from the Department's Finance Unit, Ciara Kennedy, the National Broadband Plan Division, Ben King on the Air Codes Division, Trina Quill from the Broadcasting Policy Division, Eileen O'Connor from Energy Efficiency and Affordability Division, and Eileen Doyle from the Mining Division. The total provision for my department in 2018 was some 587 million, comprising of 215 million for capital investment, including a €6 million carryover, and 372 million for current spending, of which 222 million, or approximately 60%, represents a pass-through in TV licence receipts. By the end of June of this year, my department had spent 62.4 million of its capital allocation, representing 90% of the profiled expenditure. On current expenditure, my department has spent 172.9 million, representing 96% of profiled expenditure. Appropriations at aid are running at 110.2 million, representing 96% of profiled receipts. This year, my department continues to progress projects in areas of national strategic importance, including the National Broadband Plan, in line with the Government's ambition that opportunities presented by digital transformation are available to every community and every premises in Ireland. The Trading Online Voucher Scheme to support more small companies to trade online and to help them grow sales, jobs and exports. The Digital Skills for Citizens training programme to help some 225,000 citizens to get online for the first time and participate in the digital economy and society. Continued investment in energy efficiency in our residential, public and commercial building stock and homes of those in energy poverty to drive the reduction in CO2 emission from the built environment. The electric vehicle grant scheme aimed at decarbonising transport, Infomar and the TELUS geo-environmental mapping projects, protecting our natural environment and promoting the transition to a resource-efficient circular economy, and progressing the climate action agenda and Ireland's transition to a low-carbon economy. Thank you, Caoirleach.
Thank you. Members, Deputy Stanley, do you want to come in first? Okay, Deputy Dooley.
How do you intend to do this, Chair? Is it
Programme A first, if you could limit these questions to communications.
Okay, so in that one it's section A, subhead 3. Just in relation to the National Broadband Plan, Minister. Obviously, you're behind in terms of your spending. You're behind to the tune of about 4 million, I think. Can you give us some indication of why that has happened? Have you been behind in terms of the rollout? Had you projected the rollout to begin sooner, and maybe you could bring us up to date on where we're at on that particular project?
Just give me 1 second, Deputy Dooley. Now, first of all, in relation to the National Broadband Plan, the expenditure on the NDP is related to the required activities at each phase of the programme. Due to the complexity of the procurement process and the scale of the project, it can be difficult to accurately forecast the monthly expenditure on an annual basis. For example, expenditure on certain activities in a particular month or quarter may not be reflected until subsequent months or quarters. The level of underspend has no impact on the progress in relation to the NBP procurement process and the timeline for the subsequent rollout. Additional expenditure would not have led to the conclusion of the procurement process any faster, therefore the start of the rollout at an earlier point in time. So it hasn't a bearing, and the money that has been required at various times in the process has been available to that process, and as you can see, year on year there has been sufficient funds there to do that. But thankfully we're nearing the end of this very complex process, and the Department are currently evaluating the final tender that has been received by them towards the end of last month.
It's probably ringing for about a minute. I don't know if you want to come in briefly before.
Yeah, just on that, Minister, are we any closer to getting a start date and a completion date for the rollout of the National Broadband Plan? And are you, insofar as you know, so far, are you satisfied that the tender that has been lodged is in compliance with that very detailed procurement process that was underway? Are you satisfied that the now bidder has the sufficient capacity to meet the expectations as set out? Have you checked the legal standing of the company? Have you had any knowledge of court action that's been taken in the United States to at least one party in the remaining consortium, if it is a consortium? And can you give us any sort of clarity about whether or not the remaining entity that's there complies with that procurement process that was undertaken?
Minister, I'm just conscious of the vote. If you want to come back briefly with that, or we can suspend and you can reply.
Yeah, well, just to say that in relation to the membership, I understand the procurement documentation which was issued to all bidders in 2016 set out a mechanism for the Department to assess and approve or reject changes to the membership of the bidders. It would be appropriate in a procurement process of this scale and duration for that mechanism to be put in place. I've been advised that the bidders submitted a request for approval of an alteration in the bidder membership prior to the procurement process entering its final stage, and that my department carried out an assessment in accordance with the criteria as set out in the procurement documentation and procurement rules. I understand that following that assessment, the change in the bidder membership was approved. I have also been advised by my department that the bidder for the National Broadband Plan procurement process is led by Granahan McCourt, and that the bidder has nominated a number of key subcontractors, including ENET, Nokia, Activo, the Kelly Group and the KN Group, to assist with the actual delivery and physical rollout of the National Broadband Plan.
I could just ask this question. At any stage, Minister, was there a direct conversation between you and anyone from Granahan McCourt about the potential change of the consortium, or any changes to the consortium? Did there any meetings take place either here or in the United States where that matter was discussed?
I have had a number of discussions with David McCourt in relation to this project. And there was a discussion in New York. The exact detail of that I'm just not privy to at the moment, but we can get you the detail. There's a full minute of that, and we can furnish it to you.
I'm sorry, Minister, sorry members, I'm going to suspend the meeting until we vote, and we'll come back in a few minutes. Thank you. Communications. Deputy Dooley, you were... Yeah.
The floor there, he was just responding to some of the queries that I had raised there, namely about... well, it flowed on from, I think you mentioned you had some discussions with
yes, I met Mr McCourt and his brother Frank in New York in July, and I know, look, you've met, and I think many other people here have met with Mr McCourt at different stages. The only issue in relation to the consortium that was raised was in relation to SSE, and that Mr McCourt made the point at that discussion that there may be a request put into the department for an evaluation in relation to a change in the consortium, but that's not a matter for me. I would have no direct input or role in relation to that, and that was a matter for the procurement process.
Did you express any opinion on that on that occasion as to whether you thought that might be possible, or?
Not at all, because it's not a functional role for me, and at no stage have I ever given any indication regarding anything like that, because I have no input or role in relation to that.
Knowing everything that you now know, Minister, and knowing obviously that the bid has been submitted, are you confident that the bid will be successful? Are you confident that the consortium, as it's now constructed, has the capacity to deliver against the bid that was out there? Are you confident that we'll see significant rollout of broadband next year? And are you confident that the 542,000 premises will have broadband by the end of 2020?
I have confidence in the procurement process. It has been a long, detailed and slow process, and frustratingly slow, particularly for the 543,000 families and businesses and farms and schools across the country that have been waiting on high-speed broadband. All of these matters are part of that evaluation that is ongoing at the moment, and I'm not going to comment on the detail of the evaluation that is currently taking place within the department.
You say, Minister, you're confident in a process that has reached this point, but the reality is that we're now left with a venture capital company being the bidder for one of the largest infrastructural projects that this state will probably ever offer, certainly has offered or probably ever will offer. Now, I find it somewhat troubling that you're still expressing absolute confidence in a process that has, and I think the word you used in the past was an iterative procurement process, but it has gone through all the machinations. We've seen some of the biggest companies that are, normally rolling out this kind of infrastructure, whether it's Air, the ESB, Vodafone, John Lang, SSE, all household names recognised for their capacity to roll out this infrastructure. And they've all pulled out of this process. And we're left with one venture capital company, United States based, now fronting up to deliver this infrastructure. I hope it happens. I don't want in any way to pour any cold water on your desire, which you share with me in terms of rolling it out. But I have serious reservations and concerns about a process that goes on for so long, which stated intention is to roll out the service, has been delayed so many times, and yet we have, at the end of the process, a venture capital company that's used to taking risk, high risk, for high reward. But if it doesn't work, has little by way of reputational loss. And my real concern is that all the companies that I've mentioned, from the ESB, Vodafone, Air, SSE and John Lang, have departed the scene because somehow they didn't see a return, or they didn't see a value proposition for them. Now, if that doesn't send a signal to you and your department that there's something potentially very wrong here, well then I think you've got more questions to answer, Minister. So you have an opportunity now to explain to us why you think that we're still on track.
As I've said before, Deputy Dooley, I've said numerous times in the House and I've said here at committee, I've explained in detail that this is not a normal tender process or procurement process. This is a competitive dialogue procurement process. It is unusual in an Irish context to have such a process. It is unusual to have such a very large project in this. But a competitive dialogue procurement process is the only type of procurement that you could go for when you don't know what the final solution is in relation to it. And when this process started on the 23rd or 22nd of December of 2016, at that stage, We didn't know what the final solution would be, whether it would be a wireless-based solution, whether it be a fibre-based solution. As you know, 3 bidders had said that they would go for a fibre-based solution. And at different times in this process, they have withdrawn for one reason or another, and they've given their reasons for that. They're all commercial companies. They have to make their own decisions in relation to that. But I am confident that the process will provide us with a bidder, with a final solution that will deliver high-speed broadband to every single home in Ireland. That evaluation is ongoing at the moment. I'm awaiting the completion of that evaluation, and once I have that to hand, then I can go to government.
I'll conclude on this, Minister, but you say the process was an unusual process, and for sure it was an unusual, the competitive dialogue was an unusual process. And I think it can be well argued that it has delivered a rather unusual result, where all the commercial companies that I have mentioned, Vodafone, ESB, SSE, the ESB, and John Lang, all the commercial companies that have the vast amount of experience in rolling out such infrastructure, have fallen by the wayside. And the unusual result is that a venture capital company is now the sole bidder, and the person and the company charged with delivery. If that isn't considered by you to be an unusual result, it should be, and it should create very considerable concern in the mind of the state that has so much money tied up in this and has so much reputation tied up in it, and is charged with the responsibility of rolling out this broadband. And I know it'll take time to establish whether or not this is the right decision, but grave concerns have been expressed all along the way here, Minister, by myself and others. And I really think now it's incumbent on you and your department to think very seriously where you're going from here, and as to whether or not there's the capacity now to roll out this really important service in the timelines that are expected.
I know a number of deputies need to go into the Dáil. I'm going to bring in Deputy Stanley next.
Thanks, Kyra. And Minister, just a few questions, and I'll try and cover this as concise as possible. Just in relation, up to the end of June, there was 3.941 million spent under subhead A3, right? While the total estimate was just over 19 million. What proportion of that has been spent on the National Broadband Plan, and has there been or why has there been such a large underspend in that regard? So that's one question I have for you. In relation to the broadband plan, I find your answers on this strange to date, in that I'm not sure how a government will be planning out over the next couple of years in terms of its function and budgeting, without having some ballpark figures around the capital plan and what's been earmarked for this, that and the other. And I'd just like to ask you the question in relation to the National Broadband Plan. How much is the government budgeting for that? Because obviously you have submitted some figures. The Minister for Finance, surely to God at this stage, has said to you, what is the range that we need to be penciling in here in the capital budget over the coming years to deal with this National Broadband Plan? Is it from $250 million to $500 million? Is it $500 million to $1 billion? Is it between $1 billion and $1.5 billion? I don't know. But the taxpayer would like to know, and as a member of the Parliament, I would like to know what it is. I would also like to ask you, and this process not alone has to be in dropouts. The day that Ayr was allowed to pick up the 300,000 richest pickings out of the 140,000 was one of the days that this went under and got into trouble. And I said it to you the day of that press release, and I said it to you, I was being constructive about it, because my red lights were flashing, and yours should have been flashing as well, in terms of this, that once you allowed one company to cherry pick it, and since then, if you track it since then, you followed it very closely. I'm not doubting that you want to get broadband into every home in the country. I'm not doubting that, your sincerity with that. But I've said to you many times that I believe that this is in serious financial, legal and logistical trouble, this plan where it's going. And in reality, Deputy Dooley has mentioned as in the hands of venture capitalists. really, your department, I believe, and the 80 officials, whether direct employees of the department or the ones that subcontracted in to help with this, are being made mincemeat of between two venture capitals. One, the French owner of Air, which was sold off by Deputy Dooley's party in 1999, unfortunately, because if we owned that infrastructure now, like DSB owned theirs, we would be in a completely different place. And that's the place that I would believe that we need to be in. But we're not in that space. And I note that even a lot of the right-wing commentators are starting to now say that's where we should be, that we should be using infrastructure that is controlled by the state. But we are where we are with this at the moment. And I'm saying to you honestly, I believe that this is in serious, serious trouble, and I believe this for a long time. I want to see it. I represent a rural constituency, the same as you do. I want to see jobs in rural areas. I don't want to see people in cars every day driving to Dublin who could work in places like Timahoe and Coolrain and Commerce and Mountrata and all over the place, Rosenellis, that are driving up here every day that don't need to be driving here, and indeed from County Offaly as well. So, is it the case that the cost of this has accelerated, and what's really going on, that the delays that are now being incurred, and delay after delay after delay in terms of the announcement of when the tendering process will be complete, is being delayed simply because of the legal difficulties in trying to join up the impossible, right? You know, you're dealing with the entrance of some recent people into the market, into this consortium. You're dealing now with people who have been in and out of the High Courts more often than some of the barristers like Senator McDowell here, whose job it is to go in and out of there. People who have the best legal advice, not just in this country, but in the Western world. You're up against the big guys here. And in reality, the state and the taxpayer is going to fall casualty of this, and possibly even parts of the rural broadband scheme. And what I'm asking you directly is this: is it now the case that the cost is increasing because of that cherry picking, and because the consortiums, the other ones such as Cyro, ESB, Vodafone, and several components of the ENET consortium has now deserted? They have jumped ship. Right? You're now in a much more precarious situation because of what I would call the dropouts, and the fact that you're caught between two venture capitalists, both the owner of Air and the owners of the new consortium, the ENET consortium that's still in the bidding process. And you might just answer me that. But specifically, I want you to ask, you know, in relation to the ongoing cost of the broadband plan, in terms of your department's cost, that 19 million. Why is such a low spend on that, and what proportion is being spent on the broadband plan? And just tell me, please, don't tell me that the government have not put in a ballpark figure for what the capital expenditure is going to be on the broadband plan. There has to be a range. Somebody, some official somewhere, or some minister, you or your deputy minister, somebody has to put a figure on this.
Yeah, first of all, Deputy Stanley, in relation to the subhead A3 ICT programmes, the spend to the end of June was 3.9 million. The spend to the end of September is 6.7 million, of which 5.6 million relates to the National Broadband Plan. So the vast bulk of this funding would be, of the 19 million that was allocated, is for the National Broadband Plan. In fact, 15 of the 19 million. But the variation is due in main to the lower anticipated expenditure levels on the National Broadband Plan, which reflected the stage and the complexity of the procurement process. And the variance relates to the timing of payments, also in relation to air codes. But the significant aspect is in relation to the National Broadband Plan. And this is not just this year, but in previous years we've had an underspend on that, because the procurement process has been a complicated process. In relation to the funding, an initial stimulus allocation of 275 million for the state-led intervention under the NBP is in the government's 6-year capital plan, and it was always acknowledged that further exchequer funding would be required over the lifetime of the NBP. €500 million finance in principle from the European Investment Bank was announced in April for the National Broadband Plan, and the €75 million also committed under the European Regional Development Fund. Those discussions, subject to the completion of the assessment by my officials and the presentation of that to me, then there would be further engagement with the Department of Finance with regard to this. Just coming back to Deputy Dooley, the reality is that over the last 5 years we've seen €2.75 billion in investment in building out high-speed broadband networks across the country. The vast majority of that is as a direct result of the National Broadband Plan and people wanting to get ahead of it. And Deputy Stanley highlighted one particular aspect of that. There are other companies, and Deputy Dooley and Deputy Stanley in particular, and I'm sure Deputy Ryan as well, have had private telecoms companies speak with them and explain to them that the investment that they are putting in here is not just in relation to market share in Ireland, but using this as a test bed for other parts of Europe as well. They have used, because of the unique circumstances that we have here, because we have the National Broadband Plan, because we have the Broadband Task Force, which has actually facilitated the speedy deployment of infrastructure across the country, and Minister Kine has assisted me in relation to that. And there's absolutely no doubt about it that there is, as of now, a far more friendly and positive atmosphere to direct investment here in this country. There's direct engagement with a senior official within each local authority, and that is facilitating the rollout of infrastructure of telecommunications and broadband infrastructure across the country. And yes, Deputy Dooley, this is a unique project. And there is nowhere else that we can compare this to, because nowhere else has decided to bring this scale of speed of broadband to rural areas. Nowhere else in Europe has the type of isolated rural communities and rural homes that we have here. So it's unique in terms of the objective and scale of this project, and it has been complex, it has been frustrating, but we're now nearing the end of that process.
Stanley, do you want to come back in?
Can I just ask the Minister to clarify something? He said 278 million in the 6-year capital plan. 275. 500 million from of a loan from the EIB, European Investment Bank, 75 million from the European Investment Fund. That comes to 0.85 million, right? What period of time, you've said that the 275 is over a 6-year. What period of time do you expect the 500 million from the EIB, the European Investment Bank, and the 75 million from the European Investment Fund being spent over? And could I just ask, just as well, the Minister just might give us, I don't think that you have, I think that you're very nervous of this process, right? I think that you're very, very nervous of it. And if I was in your shoes and sitting in your seat, I would be nervous of it because of the precarious situation. And you've said that it's an unusual process. It's the most unusual process I have ever heard of. I'm not an expert in commercial activity, but I'm around long enough to know that, and most people in this room are around long enough to know that if you were bidding for anything, if you were going to build a house, if you're going to build a bungalow, if you're going to do anything, if you're going to build an extension onto the house, you don't run with the first person who puts in a bid. The county councils can't do it. The county councils have to get up to 5 tenders, to have to get 3 bids for works over €500. Here is the state going to spend potentially billions, and we've one tender. It's lunacy.
I'm going to bring the Minister in.
And you have no control over it. And I'm telling you that your officials, the 80 people in total that are employed in this project, will be made mincemeat of, and the taxpayer will pick up this bill.
I'm just conscious Deputy Ryan has to get into that. I know he wants to come in under this topic as well, and Senator O'Reilly is indicating as well. Sorry, Minister, if I could ask you to be brief. Sorry.
Yes, just to answer Deputy Stanley in relation to it. This is a competitive dialogue procurement process. So, yes, no, but let me explain. If you were building a house, yes, you'd go for a standard tender. You want a 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, or 5 or 6-bedroom house, and it's easy to set the spec in relation to that. But, for example, in relation to Science Foundation Ireland, they would hold quite a number of different competitions where they actually set a challenge, and the challenge is to provide a solution. Now, how you actually come up with that solution is all part of the bid process, and it's the same in relation to this. We didn't have a defined solution in relation to it. It's not 4 walls and a roof, and the solution was part of this whole procurement process. And that's why we went for a competitive dialogue process. It has been a complex process. I have accepted that it has been frustratingly slow, but we're now at the end of that process. And independent of all of the tendering that has gone on, and we had prices submitted this time last year, independent of that, the department, through its own expertise, had independently costed this project as well. So we had a good idea of what type of pricing this would come in at, what the costings would be in relation to materials, labour, rollout, etc.
For the simple reason is that yes, to come up with a solution, but the fact is that they control the price, and you either run with the price that they demand of you and your department, or you drop this project.
Senator O'Reilly, and I might bring in Deputy Ryan straight after, because I know Deputy Ryan used to ask a question in the Dáil. So Senator O'Reilly, if you can keep it to questions, please, just to allow Deputy Ryan to come in.
Yes, of course. Minister, the questions that the direct questions I will ask you are born out of a concern that we get high-speed broadband into every home in the country, and that's what we want to achieve. My first question is just, again, would you posit or give us a time frame that you think is likely? Again, could you restate the time frame that you think is likely to get broadband into every home? Is question one. Question two, are you confident that the preparatory work by the councils, which I know some of which has gone on, getting the infrastructure sorted out at county council level to make sure that we're good to go, are you confident that that's working well? The third question is, will you set out annual targets for the state-led intervention? In other words, each year, will you say to the provider, we want this number done, and would that be on the public record? And will you benchmark them then, and observe each stage of it to make sure that there's an ongoing examination of it in the public interest? And with this is the most serious project since electrification. Number four, will the people who get the state procurement in, as you say, Minister, the diverse areas of the country, the very spread out areas, will they have high-speed download speeds on a par with other areas in the country? Will there be poor relations? Will there be any difference? And number five, how does a minimum speed of 30 megabytes per second compare to other countries across Europe? And number six, could you comment on the state of the air rollout at the moment? I know it's not the state intervention, but you're responsible for it and as part of it. And how we are at houses there, and where we're at on the air one, and what section of the country is left.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. I appreciate your brevity. I know Deputy
Minister,
Ryan,
I may not be fit to wait for the, if you'll excuse me, I may not be fit to wait for the answers, but I'll read them.
It'll be on the record.
Yeah.
Deputy Ryan, apologies. I know
no, I'm similar, because I have to go up to the Chamber in a minute. I have to agree with Deputy Dooley and Deputy Stanley. I think it's the loss of all those big companies that have decades of experience in putting wires up in this country, and that one after the other goes. You say it's a competitive dialogue, but there's no competitors. And the remaining players have no experience in comparison to ESB, Vodafone, Lang, all those companies. And so I think we're in trouble on this. What's the role of ENET in this? Or indeed those other companies you mentioned as work, are they just being contracted by Mr McCourt as the... Will you, Minister, we had AIRE here recently, a few weeks ago, at a hearing, and they were very clearly indicating they think the National Broadband Plan should be done on the electricity wires. And it was strange, because you think, well, geez, they'd be getting a lot of money out of using their poles, but they couldn't have been clearer saying that doesn't make any sense in terms of why would you have two sets of poles? Why would you have in the country, and you'd be much better off using the ESB ones, they said, because sure, they go to every house. whereas the telephone poles don't. They clearly don't want to continue with the 2 million telephone poles. So is it your expectation that we will now use the electricity wires to get to the house rather than the telephone poles? And what percentage of houses do you think will end up with fibre to the home? What percentage will be fibre to the home, or what percentage will be using another technology? Do you have an indication at this time? And lastly, I presume that 5.5 million, that's mainly lawyers and consultants, I presume, so far this year. Like, there's nothing been spent physically anywhere. That's all advisors to the scheme. Yeah. But my main question is will it be using the DSP poles, and I've nothing against Mr. McCourt or his previous experience, but you're taking a big gamble here, because you're not. If something went wrong with the ESB, you'd know, or with SSE, or with Vodafone, or you'd know that they've 10,000 people they can pull in to say, listen, we have a problem here, we've got to get it sorted. What happens if it goes belly up and the remaining bidders who don't have that substantive presence in the country, if they say, sorry, we can't do it, it's more difficult than we thought, what recourse does the state have then to pick up the pieces? I could see how we would do it with SSE or with Vodafone, because they're huge and they're here on scale. But it just seems to me we're in a very unusual process here at the end.
Thank you, Deputy Ryan. Minister.
Yeah, just since Deputy Ryan is here, I'll answer his questions first. Just come back to Deputy Stanley. Just one comment in relation to the EIB funding that will be drawn down by the bidder rather than by the state. Deputy Ryan, first of all of the bidders in this process, as part of this competitive dialogue procurement process, would have had to prove at various stages during the procurement process that they had the capacity, the financial resources to actually deliver this project. And that is all part of the assessment criteria in relation to it, and all part of the assessment in relation to the final bid. So that has to be clearly evidenced and documented within it. Will ESB poles be used? I'm sure not only ESB poles but other ESB infrastructure, the metropolitan area networks across the country, other state-owned infrastructure will be used. At the moment, we're looking at potentially up to 100% fibre, which won't be the case, as we know. How much less than that at this stage, I don't know. That this is part of the ongoing work and engagement that has been taking place between the bidder and the department. The Granahan McCourt are the bidder in relation to this process, and they have nominated a number of key subcontractors, and that would have been part of the documentation that they submitted on the 18th of September, which include ENET, Nokia, Activo, the Kelly Group, the KN Group, and they're involved in the delivery of the broadband contract across the country.
Because ENET have a lot of experience in the country of putting in ducting, hundreds of mans, 10, 15 years of. Why did they pull out?
ENET have not pulled out.
But they're not in the consortium.
I'm in a difficult position here in that I am basing it on the information that's presented to me. I'm not directly involved in this procurement process. I am relaying to you the information that I have received from the procurement team that are involved in this. The company itself and the bidder, Granahan McCourt, issued a statement on the 18th of September outlining the people that are involved in this bid and the role that they have in this particular bid. And any alteration to the make-up of the consortium it has to go through an approval process within the department and within the procurement team. In relation to Deputy O'Reilly's questions, Senator O'Reilly's questions, the proprietary work by the councils, some councils are very good. They're exceptionally good. But I think, and Minister Kine would agree with me, we are disappointed by some local authorities, and we have been engaging with those local authorities. And it is important that every single local authority is ready to roll out this. And to come back to Senator O'Reilly's question, the current rollout in relation to the air network is happening across the country at the same time. The same thing will happen in relation to the rollout of this. There will be timelines involved in that. There will be targets to be achieved, just as air have had targets to achieve. In relation to the air build-out, just at the moment, I have it here in one of these pages. I think they have, at the moment, they have built out to 220,000 premises, just short of just over. The recent data submitted by Air to the Department indicates the company has passed some 180,000 premises nationwide as part of the rural deployment. However, the information received from Air on its overall fibre deployment indicates that close to 220,000 premises have been passed throughout the country. So that's the current state of play in relation to that. Senator O'Reilly asked me, will people on the final phase of the National Broadband Plan, will they be the poor relation in relation to speed? In fact, the exact opposite. The standard delivery that we're looking at is 150 megabits of download speed and 100 megabits of upload speed. For a business, they will be able to avail of up to a gig of download speed. So these are very significant numbers. And the reason for that is that at the start of this process, the target for the definition of high-speed broadband was 30 megabits per second. And as I've consistently said throughout this, what we didn't want as a situation was when we awarded the contract that we'd have a technology that was obsolete. That did happen with the National Broadband Scheme before. And if we had been looking for a 30 megabits per second download speed, it would be effectively obsolete by the time we'd actually start or complete the build-out of that. Because we have written into the procurement process that it has to meet the changing demand, and as you know, the Commissioner setting demands, now the European Commission, of a gigabyte society, and we can accommodate this within the infrastructure that we're rolling out, and we're determined to do that. I think I've answered those questions. Setting year-by-year targets, Joe O'Reilly asked me in relation to that. The draft NBP contract includes extensive governance and oversight mechanisms to ensure the efficient and effective rollout of the network. These measures include monitoring of build-out milestones and key performance indicators on both a time and deployment area basis. Monitoring and reporting will occur monthly, quarterly and annually, a bit like the ongoing monitoring of the air contract.
Thank you. We will now move on to Programme B, Broadcasting. And Minister, if you want to make a brief opening statement.
RTD and TG Car are funded through a mix of commercial revenues obtained largely from advertising, exchequer grants and payments, exchequer grant payments and licence fee revenues. Broadcasting licence fee receipts are estimated to be £222 million in 2018. The broadcasting programme provides £190.7 million in TV licence fee receipts to RT to enable the company to meet its statutory obligations as a public service broadcaster. In addition, the programme provides £4.2 million in TV licence fee receipts and £31.5 million in grant payments to TG Car to produce a comprehensive range of programming in the Irish language. Programme B also funds new television and radio programmes through the Broadcasting Fund, operated by the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. The fund receives 7% of the net television licence receipts and amounts to £14.7 million in 2018. Expenditure on broadcasting programme to the end of June was £124.6 million, representing 99% of profiled expenditure.
Deputy Stanley and Senator McDowell indicated.
Thanks, Carol. Just in relation to broadcasting, the big issue there in broadcasting, as we know, is the 40 million not being collected in licence fees. And you know, this committee spent a long time putting a report together. Now, I would have differed maybe in terms of what was recommended at the end of it, which was basically that the state would collect it, use revenue to collect it. You know, I put forward a proposal on behalf of our party that there would be registration at purchase and registration at the point of connection to a service, and that brought everybody onto a database. And if you're on the database and didn't have a licence, you automatically got a fine. Barry could give a valid explanation as to why you hadn't, you know, if you had got rid of a television altogether or something like that. But otherwise, that people were caught basically within that net. And I just find it a bit frustrating that here we are again, you know, there's still 40 million down, Minister, on that. And what action has been taken? You know, because we come together, you know, there's a lot of work done on that. You know, members of the committee, there's a big contribution made by members of the committee to that. It's an issue that you have discussed with me and with other deputies in the Dáil Chamber. We don't want to see the licence fee increasing, but surely to God we need to be getting in the bulk of that 40 million to deal with the issues in RTE. And the second question I have is just in relation to the 190 million 724,000. Just is that target, given what's going on, is that realistic? That amount of money to be brought in on it, because it, you know, it's a huge sum of money, and just at this point, I wonder is it realistic? Thank you.
Senator McDowell, do you want to come in with your questions now, and I might ask the Minister to answer both?
Well, I could answer Deputy Stanley first.
Minister, do you want to answer Deputy
just
Stanley?
on the TV licence at the moment, inundated with paper here. The payments to RTE as of June of this year were 91.1 million, and were €2 million ahead of the payments for the same period last year. So it's 91.1 million payment to RTE, which was €2 million ahead of the payments
and what period of time
to the same period last year.
First 6 months.
June.
For 6 months.
Yeah, for the first 6 months.
10 million off it.
Sorry, say that again.
You're still going to fall nearly 10 million short if that's replicated in the second half of the year, because 90 and 90 is only 180.
Yeah, but in the second half of the year, traditionally there has been more enforcement that has taken place, and I presume there are plans for that. That will be done through An Post. An Post are the contractor for the enforcement of it.
On the specific question, what is being done? You know, we're heading for well over a year on, right? What has been done in relation to trying to gather up this 40 million that's out there? You know, other countries have achieved far higher rates of collection. Yeah. You know, well, I've expressed this to you many times. I don't want to see it increased. I don't see it being increased, but we do need to collect it.
I'm just conscious of the Minister's time here to answer.
There's two strands to that. First of all, we have the broadcasting amendment bill that has gone through pre-legislative scrutiny here, and that is with the parliamentary draftsman at the moment. We're hoping to get a draft of that back very soon. So that's one strand of it. The second strand of it is, and it's on foot of the report recommendations that have been made here, a working group has now been established on foot of a government decision in July of this year to examine the possible options to reform the collection of the TV licence fee. The working group will consider a number of options for the reform of the TV licence collection. As intended, the group will report back to Government by the first quarter of 2019 with its recommendations. So, to answer your question, Deputy Stanley, the proposal that came from the committee in relation to revenue, other possible options are going to be looked at in relation to the practical delivery of...
Include the one I put forward. Paid registration, which operates in other countries.
We can absolutely ask them to look at that as well. There's no difficulty in relation to that, and the terms of reference would allow for that to happen. But what we want to do, it's grand talking about a notional mechanism to collect it. What we want to do is to see in practical terms what is the most effective way to collect the maximum amount of TV licence, and that will report back to me in the first quarter of next year, and then bring that to Government.
Thank you. Bring in Senator McDowell.
Well, Minister, we have the non-collection as one item, which has been mentioned, and we have the cost of collection, which is 12 million odd, which goes to on post. So that's 50 million either not collected or collected and given to somebody else, not the the intended beneficiary. And it does occur to me, and I reiterate my own personal view, that if the local property tax is in the hands of the revenue and details every dwelling in the country, then subject to situations where there are multiple occupancies of single properties, say in Dublin, 4 apartments in a building, and the landlord pays on the whole lot his local property tax or her local property tax. Subject to that, there is a mechanism just simply to impose a flat rate per house. And it seems to me that the whole rationale for a television licence has completely fallen away. I can, on this phone, watch YouTube and RTE and all the rest of it. And I mean, your predecessor, Minister Rabbitte, talked about people only in caves not having some form of things, and then we got the celebrated cave tax as was proposed. But if we're being honest about it, there is a very simple mechanism there, simply to impose a sum per household in Ireland, regardless of whether they have a big yoke up on the wall or they're looking at laptops around the house, or however they're looking at this material. And secondly, it should be possible to extend it to, for instance, bedrooms per hotel or something like that, because it is how many hotels would let rooms without broadcasting available in them now? So there is, we know really what the catchment area for the licence fee is, and I know you'd be very loath at this stage to pull the carpet out from under An Post and take 12 million off them, but it is wasted money, largely speaking, if you could actually adjust the local property tax and collect the same amount of money. And there's another point, and I'd just like some information from you on this. We're inundated as we drive around between this place and where we live with advertisements telling us about, paying the licence fee and all the rest of it. And they're getting more sophisticated and more humorous and amusing and all the rest of it now, these ads, to try and keep us interested. But I mean, does RTE provide that advertising free? Does An Post pay for it? Is it a subsidy to RTE? I'd like to know who pays. I think your department pays for the advertising on RTE, trying to persuade people to buy their licences. And I mean, this is ridiculous as well. Urging people to do what, by pressing a few buttons on a computer, you could actually extract from the system using the Revenues LPT system. Would be so simple. And if going to the back to the multiple dwellings issues, there are electricity connections too, and you can work out fairly quickly what a house would owe that way. So instead of procrastinating and establishing working groups to consider this, I mean, it's a year since I suggested that here. Surely you can come up with a yay or nay to it and say that is the sensible way to deal with this. I'm
going to bring in Deputy Dooley next.
Yes, on the same substantial point, Minister. RTE are in a crisis. The BAI took the unusual step yesterday of issuing a statement effectively telling the government, get off your hands, provide the money or provide the mechanism to allow RTE to access the money. I don't hold any candle for RTE, and I'd be equally critical of them. Today we've sought the executives of RTE to come before this committee to address their failings as identified in a recent peer review carried out by the European Broadcasting Union. So RTE have a long way to go themselves in addressing their own internal matters around value for money and all of that. But the BAI is the independent authority that is charged by this state with protecting, preserving our state broadcasting service. And in their determination, RTE and TG Ceathair are significantly underfunded. And that's a matter for us, it's a matter for you. And we can deal with the legacy issues that are in RTE, and we will, and this committee has always been good at holding RTE to account in that regard. But we bring the Director General before us and we challenge her and her team, her management team, about what they're not achieving. And the retort will undoubtedly be, we don't have the wherewithal to do it, because you as politicians have sat in your hands and you haven't grappled with the funding issue. Now, we took the challenge from you, Minister. You're good at giving us challenges and you have referred quite a lot to this committee. We carried out a detailed piece of work. We didn't shy away from making tough enough recommendations that aren't necessarily politically advantageous to any of us or to our parties, but we did so in the best interest of public service broadcasting. And like others, I'm frustrated that it continues to take another working group, Q1 next year, Q2 next year. Where's that going? There was plenty of scope in the document that was provided by this committee to provide you with the wherewithal to draft a memo and take it to government. For some reason you chose not to do that and you've passed it on to another committee. That's disappointing. This can't be taken in isolation. There's a real crisis here, and we don't have to get into the background to it. I have my own views about the way in which the government are looking at this. The Taoiseach in particular seems to be infatuated to some extent with the personalities and the aura of money that revolves around the social media companies. He's adept at getting selfies with the presidents of the various social media companies, and indeed we know his desire to promote himself through fake accounts or others on social media. So there is an important foundation that our state broadcaster provides in holding all of us to account, and to do so in an independent, in a really independent way. It's an important cornerstone of our democracy, and it's under challenge. This is kind of serious, Chair, if I could. It's under challenge, it's under attack because of the way in which social media companies are developing and evolving. They're getting the advertising spend, they're getting the eyeballs, and sadly RTE, TG Ceathair and other broadcasters are not able to keep a pace. So, Minister, we really need action, no more procrastination. There's also a need, when you look at independent broadcasters and independent radio broadcasters in particular, who do an excellent work and under their licence carry out public service broadcasting. And they too have been under significant attack as a result of the shift away from more mainstream media activity. So they too need support in developing the public service content. And it would appeal to you, Minister, to look in terms of what support can be provided to them. We've previously published a bill that would assist local radio stations in particular and regional radio stations in supporting their production of public service content, similar or through a mechanism similar to the Sound and Vision Fund. And I would ask you, in an overall context, to look to providing the appropriate funding there. It really is important in terms of the preservation and protection of our democracy.
I'm just conscious he has to respond on the next programme.
First of all, Senator McDowell, you're right, there is €52 million there, and that's part of what we're looking at now. And is there a far more effective way of collecting that, both in terms of the Broadcasting Amendment Bill, and we're bringing forward the primary legislation in relation to that, but this working group is specifically looking at how we could actually implement in practical terms some of these issues. You've raised the issue of bedrooms in hotels. If you look around the room here, we have 4 televisions. Each colleague has a television in their room. There are over 1,000 televisions in Leinster House for a single TV licence. It's very hard to justify that here. So there are lots of areas that need to be looked at in relation to the TV licence and actually how it applies. In relation to your question regarding who funds the advertising is funded by RT itself. In relation to Deputy Dooley, what we're trying to do is come up here with how we actually implement this in practical terms. If I came forward with a proposal and we couldn't implement it on the ground, you'd be the very one that would come back in here and tell me that we told you so, that you wouldn't be able to implement this and you've got it wrong. So what this working group is about, it's made up of the various government departments, including the Revenue Commissioners, to see how we can practically implement this and maximise the return in relation to the collection of the TV licence. And Senator McDowell is right. You know, if there is this significant amount of money there, then we could, in practical terms, look at actually a reduction in the overall cost of the TV licence to consumers. And I'm glad that he has changed his approach in relation to this. I remember before the committee hearings, I think he was quite critical of the fact that people would have to pay for a TV licence for their second home, maybe in places in County Roscommon and elsewhere. But I think you're right, and I think how we actually apply that and implement that, and there is the potential then to actually see a reduction in the overall headline fee in relation to the TV licence rather than this incremental call for an increase in it. In relation to Deputy Dooley's question regarding the local radio stations, through the Broadcasting Amendment Bill, our intention is to reduce the fees that local radio stations pay to the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland. That will provide them in practical terms with a financial benefit because of the important role that they play. And I think if anyone was in doubt of the public service role that local radio plays, if you remember back to Storm Ophelia and the fact that electricity went out around the country, the only way that the emergency services and the National Emergency Coordination Committee could get messages out to the public across this country was through the local radio, and it was a very effective tool, as was the national radio provided by the private sector and by the public sector, and we want to see that acknowledged through the Broadcasting Amendment Bill, and to provide for bursaries as well for young journalists coming through the broadcasting sector. As I've said before, my preference would be to see that extended beyond broadcasting into the print journalism, but we have to start somewhere, and this legislation provides for that.
Thank you.
Just before the Minister gets away with what he tried to get away with there, you may recall that I indicated that in relation to what I was concerned about was that somebody who, for instance, lived in Tala and had a caravan in Courtown, that you were asking him to pay 2 TV licences per annum, which would involve him, if he was paying at the top rate of tax, which most workers get to fairly quickly, that involves him earning about €600 to pay for his licence fee obligations. That's what I was talking about. In relation to other matters on holiday homes, I pointed out that I was in the peculiar position that we'd made a family decision that we wouldn't have a licence. I wouldn't have a television, television respective.
Has the inspector come out to investigate?
And I've had to.
He did make that point.
I have had to write letters to my local would-be inspectors, pointing this out. But it is absurd that within the law, I can, in a holiday home, start looking at my laptop or my mobile phone and see an RTE programme and not require a licence. And what I'm really saying is that if you put it on the LPT, then 2 people who have an expensive holiday home in Roscommon and an expensive holiday home in Dublin would pay more than the fellow who was in Tala and had the caravan in Courtown, and that would be fairer.
Once the representations are made to the inspector and not the local TD, I don't mind.
Okay. We're moving on to programme C on that. That's on energy, and Minister Naughton, if you want to make a brief
deduction of it, he'd be locked up.
So we're on programme C. We only have about 15 minutes for the Minister here to respond to this. What I might do is bring in the deputies one after the other with the questioning after the Minister makes his opening statement.
I'm happy to take questions if you want, if this speeds up the process.
Questions on energy? We're going to look at on page 21 of our own document there, if anyone wants to.
I have only one question.
Yes, Deputy Stanley.
I know the Minister wants to get away, but just in relation to the number of new electric vehicles, I think it's 1,200 this year, Minister. What's been done to increase that figure? Because the government has a target of 500,000 by 2030, and would it be possible, or how is it going to be possible, to achieve that at the current rate of progress? Just in relation to the EVs.
Yes, I think it's over 600 pure EVs to the end of June, but I'll get you the exact figures, Brian. I just don't have them off the top of my head. But that's made up of a combination of supports. You have €5,000 VRT relief, and you have a €5,000 purchase grant. On top of that, every single new EV or second-hand EV that is registered since the 1st of January of this year will be entitled to a grant of up to €600 to support the installation of a home charger. We've also provided a grant of up to €7,000 support the purchase of EVs for taxi, hackney or limousine sector. We've reduced the benefit in kind to 0% for battery EVs since the beginning of 2018. They have the low tax. But I think probably the one issue that keeps coming up from colleagues now in relation to this, and thankfully from rural colleagues, is the charging network. So there is significant additional money going in this year, and we intend to see that replicated and increased next year, because we accept now that the infrastructure that was built out over the last number of years requires upgrade and modernisation. Some of it, we can't even get spare parts for them at the moment. So the intention is now, and there has been a delay and a time lag in relation to that because of the decision by the Commission for the Regulation of Utilities in relation to the ESB's ownership of that. But I think we have a roadmap out. In fact, when I was in San Francisco 3 weeks ago, I met a company there that is looking at new technology that could actually help in actually extending the rollout of EV charging points across the country, and I know they're engaged with the ESB on that presently.
Deputy Dooley.
Well, that's very good news, Minister, because one of the biggest inhibitors that I come across in talking to people about the use of electric vehicles has been the bad experience by those that have already moved to electric vehicles because of the lack of fast charging points, particularly in suburban and more rural and semi-rural areas. It really is a bad experience because there's a relatively small number of charging points. They often find them not working or poorly policed by local authority traffic wardens, where you find people parking in them. So we really have to have an entire rethink about the rollout of that network, and that needs to be delivered quickly. There's also the issue, and it's something that I've been pushing with the Department of Finance through our negotiators from a budget perspective, but the whole hybrid model, and I know you're a user of a hybrid vehicle yourself. The issue about the tax rebate, that comes to an end, as I understand, this year, and it needs to be rolled out for a further period of time, because there's little doubt that people who have range anxiety and have distance issues like yourself and others, where an electric vehicle is not a suitable mode of transit for them with the current range, that to get people to move towards the hybrid vehicle, that's really important, and therefore that tax rebate does need to be extended in that area, and I'm sure it's something that your department, I'm sure it is something that you've identified and one that you will continue to pursue, and hopefully we'll all be successful in seeing that come to pass in the budget. So really the big issue on the EVs has to be the rollout of fast charging. And I think that in itself will be an incentive to people, because it's not until it becomes obvious to people that these charging points are there that it acts as a good way of advertising.
Yes, Look, Deputy Dooley, first of all, I think, yes, there's two cohorts of people. I think there are many people out there that an electric vehicle would be very, very suitable for them. And I think what we're trying to do with the rollout of the roadshow across the country, working with the sales rooms and showrooms across the country, is encouraging people to test drive an electric vehicle. And I think for many people that commute into the likes of Dublin or the major towns, and even some of the rural and provincial towns, electric vehicle is very suitable for them. Yes, for you and I, an electric vehicle, because not of range anxiety, but because of range, it is not suitable for us. And I think the hybrid is the solution there in relation to that. As you know, I drive the Toyota hybrid, but there are many range of hybrids out there at present. And I would actively encourage colleagues that when they are thinking about upgrading their vehicle or replacing their vehicle, that they would consider a hybrid vehicle as a solution for them. And it is important that the budget sends out the right messages in relation to that, and they're part of the ongoing engagement that I'm having with the Minister for Finance in relation to the budget measures that will be announced next week.
Thanks very much, Minister. And what measures are you as a government taking to try to address the really big problem in terms of transport generally? And of course there's the domestic vehicles, but there's also the large trucks, and I know there's a desire to try to move some of the commercial vehicles more towards compressed natural gas. And looking at our public transport fleet, what can be done there? Like, dreadful decision taken recently to purchase 110 buses. I think it was just last year in exactly the same format as before, just diesel buses. And that was really regrettable, and I know it's something that I'm sure you have a very strong view on. What can you do from your department to ensure that doesn't happen again, and to try to promote within the commercial semi-state area and in the commercial sector generally, to try to get a move away from petrol and diesel? And in addition to that, to look at the whole heating area as a way of reducing our emissions. The deep retrofit programme, I see you have some money here under a pilot programme. We've looked at our targets in the past, and we really have to ramp up the deep retrofits to get to where we would expect to be. Forget about 2020, but even by 2030, we'd really have to accelerate the activity there. So are we to hope or help you in a way of trying to get more monies from the Exchequer through the budget to assist in that process?
Deputy Minister.
Yeah, just I'll deal with the deep retrofit first of all. The big challenge for me now, just at the moment, is not actually more money. The big challenge for me is actually to actively encourage people to actually carry out these upgrades. That's just at this point in time. And the other challenge is actually to get contractors to do it. Because a lot of the contractors are not prepared to get into this sector. Like, we're going to see a significant ramp up over the next few years in relation to the funding that's going to be available. But it is important that we have the capacity within the system to actually carry out the work and the demand there as well. So what we've done with the Warmer Homes scheme is we've expanded the range of work that will be carried out, and that's extended now to a deep retrofit effectively. So we are wrapping homes with external wall insulation if they're not cavity wall, doing the attics, looking at replacing the windows if they need to be replaced, and doors, and also the heating system if the heating system needs to be replaced. So you're talking about a significant investment, and that's free of charge to anyone that's in receipt of the fuel allowance, long-term unemployed with children, in receipt of the carers allowance where they're residing with the caree, the domiciliary care allowance. And so there's a significant amount of money there now, and it would really assist me if colleagues would actually encourage their own constituents to actually apply to the SEAI for that. There is a very simple application form, and the SEAI take it from there. So, you know, the SEAI is funded directly by my department to provide this service to the public. So I would encourage people to do that. And that's based on the knowledge and understanding we've gained from the deep retrofit pilot here in Dublin. In relation to the issue regarding trucks and heavy goods vehicles, first of all, in relation to the point that you make regarding public transport, I don't disagree with it. As in from the middle of next year now, all public transport vehicles will be low emission vehicles that will be purchased, and that's set out in the National Development Plan. On the commercial semi-state side, An Post now have announced that they are transitioning their fleet to complete zero-emission fleet in the next decade, and that's right across this country, starting initially within the canals over the next 18 months here in Dublin, extending beyond that. The Gardaí have purchased electric vehicles. The Army have purchased electric vehicles. We're actively encouraging other state and semi-state bodies to do the same. And electric vehicles can deal with some of the heavy goods vehicle demand. In fact, I think tomorrow morning actually, we're launching a new light goods vehicle here in Dublin, electric vehicle. But the other side of it is then compressed natural gas and biogas, and we hope that we will be in a position to make an announcement soon regarding the supports for the biomethane. I know that there's a paper due up to be soon on that, and that would allow for bio CNG to be on the market. And in fact, it's operational in your own constituency at the moment. We went down to the launch in Shannon there in relation to Clean Ireland and the operation of their refuse trucks, and hopefully we can see more of that happening across the country.
Deputy Ryan, I'm going to bring you in. Again, the Minister has limited time. But
I appreciate it. I'm sorry I took up for these questions, but I'm very glad to come back in on this. Just a couple of questions on this energy side. Firstly, Minister, in relation, how do we budget, or how is the budget coping with or managing this 500 million climate fund? What's the timelines for spending it? How does it fit into the existing budget process? I mean, there's a risk, in my mind, that the Minister of Finance would say in just about everything you could ask for, well, listen, it'll come from the climate fund. But, so I'm just interested, how does that integrate into the standard budget process? On the electric vehicles, the ESB at our Climate Action Commission meeting last week said we should have a fund for a public fund for fast charging points, recognising we do have a real problem here. And I could see, just for example, just taking public car parks, taking every hospital, every Garda station, every library, every council office, every primary healthcare centre, every department building. If we were just in each of those, right across the country, put in 2 or 3 charging points, you've a really significant network. Most of the public car parking in Dublin city centre is public service car parking places. I think we've got a sense of maybe about 25 million would be needed for that sort of level of just immediate quick fix in terms of, well, not only quick fix, but quick injection of charging points. I'm interested to know whether you're looking at that. And how do we deal with the legacy investment? We made an investment 10 years ago, about 25 million and similar. What happens to that? Is that written off? Is that just transferred to the ESB as that's their asset in the sense, and the new, CRU process continues? 2 other questions. On the deep retrofit, is it not time in some ways to kind of make a switch to say we're no longer doing small jobs? One of the ways of getting this deep retrofit, which is what we need, because there's a risk if you do a small job, you think, and you try and come back in 5 years later and say, oh, listen, you need a bigger job, harder to do it. Maybe at this point we're right to say, put the axe on all small things. From here on, it's going to be all big. We're going to securitize it in terms of the financing of it, and we're going to standardise it in terms of the construction, so that you're doing, contractors are doing 100 lots or 500 lots, and then you get the contractors coming at you. But surely now is the time to do that. I mean, the scale of ramping up ambition we need is so huge. that it has to be deep retrofit every house, and therefore to make that happen, maybe it's just time to switch to deep retrofit and everything. And last question, just in relation, following on from our Climate Action Committee meeting last week, we were told by the Secretary General that you would have, we would have in the next day or two a copy of the consultation paper you're presenting on the National Energy and Climate Action Plan. Can we have that in advance of our Cabinet, of our further meeting on Thursday? We have a meeting on Thursday. Can we have a copy of that paper?
Well, I haven't seen the paper. So,
up to you.
Yeah, it hasn't come to me yet. In relation to the deep retrofit, you're right, and that's what we're trying to do now, is to move away from doing small works in homes to the Warmer Home Scheme to ramp that up. We've also launched a pilot deep retrofit scheme for people that are not fuel poor, to look at the type and scale of work that needs to be done on individual houses, so that we have a template to ramp that up. And there is significant capital funding there available through the National Development Plan to do that. We've also been in discussions with Minister Kine, who has been engaging with his former colleagues and with Teagasc in relation to how we could use the agricultural advisory network across the country to actually assist in encouraging people to actually carry out deep retrofits of their home and upgrade their homes. In relation to the funding, we've had some engagement with the European Investment Bank on that, to see could we put a structure in place that would encourage people basically to pay as they save in relation to energy. And in fact, only last week I wrote to all of the commercial banks in Ireland asking them to look at bringing in incentives for people who carry out energy upgrades of their homes or buy an electric vehicle or a low emission vehicle car. From 2019, in relation to new builds, the NZEB regulations will mean that new homes will represent a 70% improvement in the energy and carbon dioxide emission performance over the 2005 standards, and I think that's a significant step forward. In relation to the Climate Action Fund, as you know, it was launched on the 9th of July. Closing date was yesterday. 100 applications have been received. I know that one of those applications is from An Post, who are looking at rolling out charging points to post offices, and where they actually have public car parking spaces across the country. An Post would have a number of those that are accessible to the public, and actually rolling out charging points across the country in relation to that. The intention would be that the Climate Action Fund would be there to drive forward the agenda in relation to rolling out some of this infrastructure, because the funding is going to be coming from motorists across the country, and that will be put back into the alternative infrastructure that's needed, but also very much in trying to drive innovation. The fund itself, and we require primary legislation to formally establish the fund, will allow for a situation that it will be continually replenished over time, and it would be a separate fund that would be drawn down in relation to proposals and bids that would come in through the Climate Action Fund process. In the short term, the intention is to try and ensure that we can start to invest very immediately in relation to the build-out of EV infrastructure and the upgrading. We actually have quite a comprehensive network, but we need to upgrade that network so that we have fast chargers and that there's timely repair, and that there are more fast chargers available at the locations. And that's part of the discussions that have been ongoing between this company in the US and the ESB. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just a question on the standards, Minister. One of the things we've been hearing as well is that our new building standards still allow fossil fuel heating systems, and our new school building standards preclude renewable heating systems, actually insist on fossil fuel. And that seems, in a country where we're going to have to deep retrofit everything, to be still putting in fossil fuel seems absolutely madness. Can we not, can you not, within Cabinet, or if it needs other ministers, education and so on, just insist we stop fossil fuel heating straight away, now, today?
In fact, I've had that engagement with the Minister for Education in the last as recently as the last 10 days again, and it is something that we want to see, and I think schools are a good example of that. While through the SEAI the government is carrying out retrofits of schools, and the intention is that every single public building will be retrofitted over the next decade as part of the National Development Plan. It makes far more sense that as new public buildings are being constructed at the moment, that they are being built without a reliance on fossil fuels.
Minister, I know you have to leave us, but Programme F, Appropriations and Aid and Environment Fund, if members wanted to ask you questions to put in writing, would you be able to respond back in writing?
No problem.
So if with the members' agreement to leave Programme F, Appropriations and Aid and Environment Fund, and if you want to write to the Minister directly, he'll reply to you, and we'll deal with Minister Kine now for Programme D and Programme E, if that's agreeable. Yeah, thank you. Minister Kine, so this Programme D, Natural Resources, if you want to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. The aim of Programme D is to manage Ireland's mineral, hydrocarbon and other geological resources in a sustainable and productive manner. Funding of €26.7 million under this programme allows my department to provide reliable geoscience support for environmental protection and the sustainable development of Ireland's natural resources. The programme provides funding of €3.7 million for mining services, including €1.4 million for remediation works at historic mining sites at Avoca and silver mines. It also includes an allocation of some €12 million for the Geological Survey of Ireland services, including €8 million for the TELUS and Infomar mapping projects. The Infomar project is Ireland's national seabed survey and is managed by the Geological Survey of Ireland in cooperation with the Marine Institute. The TELUS project consists of airplane-mounted geophysical measurements and ground geochemical sampling. Data from the project will allow for improvement in geological maps, new radon mapping and agricultural mineral maps. This data will also facilitate better land use planning and research. Under the Geological Survey of Ireland's groundwater programme, ongoing monitoring will provide key data relating to Turlock, flooding to OPW and local authorities. Expenditure on the Natural Resources Programme to the end of June was €7.2 million, representing 66% of profiled expenditure. And I'd like to acknowledge the work of the Exploration and Mining Division and Geological Survey of Ireland over the last week in assisting and advising Monaghan County Council in relation to an unfortunate mine collapse that occurred at Drumgossett, County Monaghan, over a week ago, which is something that is of concern to the community, and I'd like to compliment the team for their ongoing work and advice.
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy Ryan.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. With regard to petroleum exploration, again, one of the briefing documents that we have here in terms of output or measures of success in the department, I remember seeing a figure there that the number of wells that were drilled this summer was 0. Is that correct? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. Given that we kind of sense opened up all our licence blocks a number of years ago and kind of tried to really and provide huge incentives in terms of encouraging seismic activity and sharing data and so on, and given that oil is up at $60, $70 a barrel again, how is it that, how many drills do you expect to be drilled next year?
I cannot say that. There's a number of licences in the offing. I know there is one that has gone on to the next stage in the Porcupine. That was granted recently to the next stage. Other than that, nothing has come before me.
I mean, just the concern I have is, I suppose, is we're putting all this effort and resources into an industry that increasingly looks, it should be dying because it's the biggest threat to our future in terms of pollution. But also, I mean, those wells cost typically, they could be €100 million a pop in terms of, I remember the Dunquin field a number of years ago, I think that was the cost of it. And I'm thinking there's no investment by the department on offshore wind or in the Atlantic, in the same seas, that I know is working, that I know we have the biggest resource of all. We don't need seismic anything, we know it's there. How is it that we're spending all this money and resources in petroleum, we're not doing any drilling at the end of it, and we're doing nothing on the real energy resource that's out there that everyone knows is going to be the future for energy? Why are we in the dead one, not in the new one?
Thanks, Deputy. The total spend of petroleum services is just €504,000 out of my budget in that under the natural resources of 26 million. So it's not a huge spend. You mentioned 100 million to drill a well. Certainly the state don't invest that. That's private investment, and that's the process that we operate on. I agree in relation to offshore potential. The offshore potential is huge. We've been described in some ways as in terms of the offshore wind potential to the equivalent of Saudi Arabia in relation to oil. So the potential is huge. I know that the Taoiseach's office has taken over responsibility in relation to the marine and foreshore bill, which, as you know, the marine area in terms of foreshore is a highly complex one, and has seen a number of changes at the department over the years. So they've taken a leadership role in that, in advancing that very important bill, which in many ways has stagnated development of the offshore.
Small minister, it's true, as you say, it's not as a capital subhead, or as you know, it's not groundbreaking, but even to move that money into the licensing of offshore wind, or start thinking about that, putting all our attention and our good people and engineers and the same skills, the same skills in terms of marine engineering, or indeed licensing and international regulatory environment, those people could be really put to good use in offshore development. And what we hear in our Climate Action Committee presentations is people saying nothing's happening because we don't have that licensing and administrative structural process progressed. So as a Galway man, particularly where this is going to make the West Coast wealthy, I would have thought, why are we betting it all on the old energy rather than the new? You don't need to answer, but just to make the point. Can I ask one further question on this? Is it expected that there will be some new round of offering licence or offering exploration or seismic or any other new licensing arrangements for offshore oil companies in Ireland? What is the timeline for that, if there is any new round?
Hasn't been brought to my attention of any plans for a further round. We're dealing at present with the existing round from, I think it was 2015 licensing round. Regarding other areas of offshore, there is investment in relation to research through the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, through the Marine Institute, in relation to offshore wave, potential tidal power, and relation to offshore. There's 3 test sites, one in Galway Bay, which was quite controversial in terms of getting through the planning process, what was granted in relation to in relation to floating devices and wind and tidal and wave, and also there's a smaller test site off the Cork coast and one planned as well in Belmunna. So there is investment in the offshore in relation to these new technologies as well within the department and supported by the department.
Indeed there is, but those wind and tidal, wave and tidal rather, are very much long-term, 25-year, 30-year. It's a long shot, but worth doing. But the one we need to be investing in now, in terms of licensing and planning, strategic environmental assessment, and bedrock, seabed and other surveys, is in offshore wind, which isn't a 20-year bet, it isn't a 5-year bet. This is happening at scale in our European neighbours, and indeed in America and in Japan and Chile and elsewhere. So we're just being left behind. We're being forgotten about. I know myself in Brussels we could raise huge funding immediately if we were there with the licensing process for West of Ireland offshore wind. But there's nothing, and for a Galway minister, surely that's the prospect. You could switch that whole county on, and indeed Mayo, and indeed Donegal, but there's nothing. I don't see anything in the budget.
As I said, there is funding through SAI and the Marine Institute for projects like this in relation to the test sites, and they are looking at the technologies in relation to floating pontoons, so that you won't have to embed the turbines in the sea floor, but that they will be floating and mounted in that fashion. So that technology is ongoing. I suppose the potential for the West Coast is huge, but also the pitfalls in relation to the weather extremes that will be there. So that is one of the issues that has been looked at in relation to scaling up. The size of potential wind turbines. It's generally accepted that the larger the wind turbine and the higher the greater potential to generate energy. So that testing in relation to the actual floating devices has been looked at, but I'll revert to the position that the marine and foreshore bill is one area that is stagnating development, if you like, in relation to our offshore. And as I said, I think it's something that the Taoiseach has prioritised now, and I hope to see movement on it because it has stagnated for a period of time.
Thank you.
It's good to hear no new licences are due to be issued in any foreseeable time frame. As we
rounds,
yeah. Are indeed individual, nothing other than the continuation of existing licences. There will be no new licences issued.
There are no plans in relation to two applications for licensing options in the Celtic Sea are currently under consideration. There are 8 applications to convert existing licence options. They were awarded under the 2015 Atlantic Margin round, so that's where we're still dealing with the 2015 Atlantic Margin round. But there's no immediate plans for a new round.
Those 2 Celtic Sea ones are 2015 licences. Are they? It's moving to a new stage within the licence.
Anything that's happening is moving to a new stage rather than a new round. And,
can I just suggest, Minister, that because we're in the middle of a democratic process here in considering this issue about whether we issue any new licences or indeed what happens with the current ones, that the Department, and I think there's nervousness from my side because certain rounds were issued in the past in interim EGNOM periods, but that we would put a hold on new licence applications until the democratic will of this House is made clear. And the democratic will be made clear because, as I understand, there isn't a money order requirement on that bill, so it's highly likely it will get to committee and report stage. That we should be careful not to be agreeing licences if we know we're going to be introducing legislation that may then create further difficulties in that regard.
Well, I welcome the debate that's going on at the moment within the committee, and they haven't made a decision yet whether the bill that has been proposed by Solidarity will be going on to the next stage. I know you've had, and I followed it and read the transcripts of the report of the hearings that you've held a number of months ago. So in relation to the next stage, I'm not sure, have you decided on the next stage of that? Are you going to allow the bill to go to committee stage, or have you made a decision on that? So, I mean, I'm operating under the law.
I've been cheering it on to committee stage.
I'm operating under the law.
Just to give the Department and yourself a heads up. Okay. I see it as a racing certainty it goes to committee stage and to enactment.
Well, that would be subject to the law. This is a minority government, as you know, so it's subject to all parties. You know, what the views opposite will be at the final stage, we don't know. So I'm operating under the existing law at the moment, but there's no discussion on a new licence round. The last round was 2015, and anything else which comes before me relates to the different stages of the licensing process.
We're in the process, Minister, preparing a draft report on that, which will come before the Minister in time. We're going to move on to Programme E, that's Inland Fisheries. Minister, if you want to make an opening statement.
Programme E provides grant aid of some €33 million to Inland Fisheries Ireland, which is responsible for the conservation, management and regulation of Ireland's inland fishing resource. The Inland Fisheries Programme includes an allocation of just under €18.8 million towards the SAF costs of Inland Fisheries Ireland, the Lochs Agency, which is a north-south body and is co-funded by VideoParliament and the Northern Ireland's Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. Also included in the programme is €14.3 million for non-pay current and capital expenditure by the two agencies. The 2018 grant allows Inland Fisheries Ireland to continue to deliver on its licensing, permitting and enforcement responsibilities, along with the rehabilitation of our rivers and streams. The delivery of a wide-ranging set of investments, innovations and promotions under the National Strategy for Angling Development will ensure that Ireland's fish stocks and angling infrastructure are protected and enhanced for both their economic value and their recreational benefit to the communities and visitors they serve across Ireland. Expenditure on the Inland Fisheries Programme to the end of June was €13 million, representing 97% of profiled expenditure. Just in relation to two areas that we are looking at the moment. One is in relation to the yield hardship scheme, which myself and Minister Naughton will be briefed on, I expect, if not this week, in the coming week, in relation to finalising that scheme. There is some €1.2 million in the 2018 estimates and commitment in relation to 2019 and 2020 as well for that scheme, and also some €300,000 for the Lagosyphon weed control programme on Loch Carrob, which is vital in terms of ensuring that very important brown trout fishery and lake is protected against invasive weed. And there are also some €1 million capital allocation for the agreed project to replace IFI's rigid inflatable boats. This is a health and safety matter following the recent tragedy involving a Coast Guard RIB. IFI worked extensively with the Marine Survey Office on a revised technical specification. The first RIB was delivered to County Donegal in June 2018, and I know there's another 2 planned in the coming weeks. So there's €1 million capital allocation, and IFI also intend to use an estimated €1.2 million to replace end-of-life vehicles within its fleet.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Ryan.
Again on metrics, Minister, and I think one of the ones here, I mean, we get this briefing note with the I presume from the department, which is very useful or very welcome, but one of the key metrics I'd love to see, and maybe the department or Inland Fisheries could provide it separately directly to me, is just the salmon run this year in terms of down to river by river. I think, well, I mean, we wouldn't do river in this assessment, but just, I think it's one of the key metrics, because obviously it's a metric what's happening in the Atlantic as well as what's happening in our rivers and so on. But do you have any personal anecdote, or have you heard evidence or understanding from Inland Fisheries, what is the, and maybe it's still too early, there's still salmon running this late, but is there any sense that department has, or you as Minister have, in terms of whether the end of drift netting, God, 10 years ago now, 15 years ago, has had a success, whether we're still seeing rivers, or increasingly are the rivers going, I'd be interested to know the number of rivers going in, out of catch and release, or out of any catch or out of, as an indicator, where are we on our wild salmon population?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the ban didn't have the anticipated impact. Certainly not what was spoken of at the time. We've had a difficult decade, but signs over the last year or two that figures are improving. The exact cause, it's hard to know. It's been speculated upon in relation to whether it be global warming, whether it be in relation to sea lice, whether it be in relation to super trawlers. We don't know. Obviously, we're in part of the NASCO area, which is an international committee that collaborates and works to protect the fisheries. Clearly, we have a very scientifically managed fishery in relation to salmon, where salmon numbers are either counted or assessment taken of the runs of fry and red. So it's internationally accepted that we use the best expertise that we have to try and measure the salmon stocks, and we have a conservation limit, and if that's reached, the river can be open or closed or under catch and release. So it's very much for the 147 rivers or sections of rivers or estuaries. It's very much a scientific basis, but it has been a worrying trend for some period of time now in relation to the amount of salmon that come back for the comparison to the smolts that leave our river system. So, as said anecdotally, there is a view that things have improved in the last year or so, and positive for the coming year as well. But in the next month or so, we'll be publishing the figures for this year, with the view to making recommendations for rivers for next year, whether they'll be open, closed, or a catch and release.
I'd love to see that. I've been hearing similar anecdotes. That's why I asked the question whether there was any science behind it. I look forward to that report when it comes out. I just think some of our metrics, we might think of some of our metrics, and actually that's the ultimate metric. What's happened? What's our water quality? What's our fish numbers? What's the aquatic life? All the other metrics are kind of interesting, but I think it's the primary purpose to restore that natural biodiversity. And if we are succeeding or failing in that, everything else is, the number of inspections or the number of fines or the number of prosecutions is secondary importance.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm not sure, as a committee, have you met with Inland Fisheries or met with the scientific team to, I suppose, get their point of view?
IFI have written to us. We just don't have any time in our schedule up to Christmas, but we said that we would look at it again in the new year in relation to meeting them, because I know it is certainly an issue.
They have a great expertise in relation to the area, and I'll furnish you with the details as they come in relation to this year's figures. They'll go out on public consultation, and something would statutory instrument will come before me in just before Christmas for the coming year.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you and Minister Naughton, all your officials, for attending today. So I propose that the committee publish the opening statement and briefings in relation to this meeting on the website. Is that agreed? Agreed. So the committee is adjourned until Thursday, the 11th of October at 2 p.m. in Committee Room 1. Is that agreed? Thank you. Thanks very much.